Hello. This is Aware on the Air, a weekly program brought to you by members and friends of the anti-war, anti-racism group of Champaign-Urbana. Tonight we're having a kind of round robin on a number of topics. Our usual host is not here, but we will try to make do with some of the material that we think deserves your attention. So I want to start with one particularly scary item that was in the New York Times a few days ago by Roger Cohen, titled China's Monroe Doctrine. He's in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. He says that the international relations expert John Mearsheimer has issued a new edition of his classic, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics. And he makes a powerful case, Cohen says, for the inevitability of war in Asia as China rises. So he thinks this is the core strategic question of the 21st century. Well, neither is saying exactly that war with China is inevitable. He thinks that there is going to be a major conflict, a long-running conflict, where China will eventually take the position concerning the Pacific Basin and South Asia and all the countries on its border that the USA took in the 19th century concerning the Monroe Doctrine, saying that European powers were not welcome in the Western Hemisphere. Cohen writes that China is asserting sovereignty in the South China Sea, angering the Philippines and Vietnam. Vietnam, by the way, seems to be moving closer to the USA out of fear of China. The actions seem to vindicate Mearsheimer, who writes that a more powerful China can be expected to try to push the United States out of the Asia-Pacific region, much as the United States pushed the European great powers out of the Western Hemisphere in the 19th century. We should expect China to devise its own version of the Monroe Doctrine, the 19th century keep out of this hemisphere message of the United States to Europe, actually going back to about 1823. Cohen notes that the Mearsheimer prediction is not inevitable, as he acknowledges, but it is plausible. So if you are an adherent of what is called realism in international politics, meaning apparently in the vocabulary of these people that you assume that nations are always seeking more power and influence for themselves, and they will go as far with that as they can without the costs mounting up beyond some tolerable amount. So there will be conflict, and there will be resistance, and there will be some kind of cost-benefit analysis, I guess, going on, of ever-expanding power on the part of these nations that have more and more power. So that's not a very inviting prospect, but that's what the realists tell us. I think some of their assumptions are highly questionable, but it's based in part on the Hobbesian notion in Leviathan, chapter 11, that human nature is a matter of seeking power after power, ending only in death. That's obviously wrong about a whole lot of people, but we seem to have a number of international relations experts and war theorists who adhere to some such point of view. So I want to go around and see if any of my colleagues have any comments on this rather depressing prospect, and see what you have to say about it.
Well, actually, I listen to Alex Jones here and there, I must admit, and there was a gentleman on his show yesterday who believed that exact same thing. And I didn't get to listen to the whole report, but I remember him stating that China now has surpassed the United States as far as economics. Like they now are ahead of us that way. So, I mean, with power comes a whole lot of awful things. So, I mean, we can hope that it doesn't come to that, but I mean, look what we do ourselves. I mean, we invade nations under false pretenses, and we consider that justice. So, I mean, nothing really surprises me anymore.
Yeah. That was Deb Johnson. I should have perhaps introduced everyone, but let's go on. Does anyone have anything else on this theme?
Karen and Karen do.
Yes, yes, I do.
Karen,
I'm really tired of all the fear-mongering about China, okay? I'm going to be very blunt here. What we are doing, the U.S. is doing in the Pacific, to me, is really tantamount to provoking problems. Yes, Vietnam is in the back burner, just like the Philippines, just like Korea, just like what other nation have we been talking about? It is Asia, and China has not ever shown the kind of hegemony that the U.S. has shown. All right. People could argue with me. I know a lot of Chinese who would argue with me and say, well, about Taiwan. Well, when did they take over Taiwan? What about Tibet? Okay, Tibet and Xi'an province, but those are also were and always have been part of China geopolitically. Now, the fear-mongering by people, is just giving an excuse. And I don't know about what's his name, Mearsheimer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know who he is. I haven't read his article to see what he has to say. According to what I've read, China will be the reigning economic power in about 4 years. They're not there yet. What exactly does that mean? I mean, I've been reading about this, I've gone into the details, but I don't really understand economics. What it will mean is that they will have surpassed us in economic power. That doesn't mean that they still won't have poverty. But they have less than half the military buildup that the U.S. has. And I really, I really think we're supposed to be about peace. And I know that both Ron, you, and Carl have been talking about the pivot to Asia. And I really think we need to look at it very carefully, look at what's going on behind the scenes at all times, before we come out with so-and-so said this and so-and-so said that.
Yeah.
Now, I know who Roger Cohen is. I will have to read the article in the New York Times, but I would really like to read the Mearsheimer.
Yeah. It is said that the gross national product of China will exceed that of the USA by the end of this year, but that is spread over a whole lot more people, so they're individually, on the average, much poorer, and they are not spending nearly as much on armaments as the USA is. We're spending on the military more than the next, various figures are given, 10, 12, 15 countries combined. So that's where we are in our supposed pivot to Asia, and we're trying to figure out here what is that supposed to mean. Are we going to be or remain the dominant power in the entire Pacific Basin, or can we trim our expectations somewhat because I think peaceful relations with these other countries will demand that in the longer run. Karen?
Yeah, I think that, and I know Dave has something to say too. I think that if we continue on the road that we are headed, the U.S. will start a war, and I would really prefer that we not. I think that the TPP is one indication that we are headed, that we want to cut off relations, and I think that maybe we should actually try to get along with our neighbors. Like if two neighbors had, kept getting bigger and bigger tanks to put in their driveways, that someone should stop putting tanks in their driveways and just kind of like reach over, tear down the fences and actually just go over and talk to each other. That's my opinion, Dave.
Well, there are various moderating influences. One is the enormous amount of American bonds held by China. Another is the degree of economic entanglement that we have with them. And should that be promoted or not? David?
Well, Ron, that was a perfect intro into what aspect I want to talk about. Let's go back 20-some years, mid to late 1990s. We have to ask ourselves, how did this happen? How did China become such an economic powerhouse and about ready to surpass the United States? Well, it's the same politicians that wrapped themselves in the flag and pushed through these corporate trade treaties like the China Trade Preference Act, in which lowered Chinese tariffs of Chinese products, while at the same time U.S. and other multinational corporations set up shop, oftentimes with taxpayer money to help them move, and they basically began to flood the U.S. market with cheaply made goods, putting American workers out of work, where the basically flow of money for products went from the pockets of American to China. Now, I have nothing against the Chinese people, and that if they were to build their economy on their own domestic products and innovation and a fair amount of trade with other countries, but this was a rigged system. Now, of course, it wasn't for the benefit of the Chinese, it was for the benefit of multinational corporations. But here again, we have the chickens coming home to roost. Now, corporate America got what they wanted, I mean, massive profits at our expense, and now, they're to blame. And now, all of a sudden, that they're an economic, they basically managed their economy very, very well. If you look at a lot of reports about how the Chinese government was involved in doing a lot of planning, in addition to having a lot of opportunities for people to start small businesses and stuff. As Karen has talked before about the high-speed rail systems and a lot of other things that they've used their money wisely for, instead of going off to conquer foreign nations to try to grab their energy resources. So, I mean, we only have these politicians to blame. The vast majority of the American people didn't want this to happen. Now, if you try to go to a store and find anything made, I mean, good luck finding anything made in the United States that's not made in China. Again, I'm not blaming the Chinese people, but what I'm saying is these same politicians that sent us off to wars in Iraq and Afghanistan based on lies are the same ones that basically deindustrialized our country and created the economic powerhouse that China is. Now that they've become an economic powerhouse and holding a lot of bonds and other financial instruments here in the United States, all of a sudden, the corporate interests in this country are a little concerned, and now they want to contain them militarily. So it's just another example of not just not working in the best interests of the American people or any people, the peoples worldwide, but in the interests of the 1%, and just further, even when you look at it in that perspective, it's still it's incompetence in the sense that they allowed to get to the point where now all of a sudden, oh my God, we must encircle them militarily because they're too powerful economically. So that's
But who would we borrow money from in order to run that war?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
We wouldn't have to borrow money.
Japan.
Because we borrowed money
Japan.
to do our current wars
Yeah.
from China, and that's
But
how they
we-
got the bonds.
We would have had the money to do it anyway.
Right, but we
Yes.
would borrow from Japan, who
We'd
is
borrow
the
from
number one.
Japan, Europe, or
number
whoever else
one-
would lend it, yes.
Yeah, U.S. puppet. One point I would like to make, I was reading the China Law blog last night, and it's all about legalities in doing business with China. And there is a concern because now with they're having an economic downturn, and so a lot of people, in fact there's a company right here in Illinois that just lost something like $50,000 US because their supplier suddenly disappeared. Okay. This is happening now. What the lawyers pointed out was, and this is an international specialist with offices there in China, that this happens all the time everywhere, not just China, but it has been predicted that this is what would happen. Whether or not his advice was getting a lawyer to try to pursue it, anything up to $200,000, $400,000, probably wasn't worth it. These are the smaller businesses that probably are going out of business as a result of the economic downturn. But this is one of the dangers of doing business overseas. However, what they also pointed out is what I've been saying. The government of China wants to keep their people happy. So they are actually, in the bigger companies, the bigger corporations, they are actually increasing wages. They are providing more benefits. They are doing what they can to eliminate pollution. They are doing what they can to keep the people happy because they know that's what keeps them in power. Don't we all wish that our government was as sensitive to our needs and concerns as the Chinese government is? So I make this statement because when you say, this is this is what's been happening, and now we're unfortunately paying the price for it. And it's sad.
I might want to
It's
add,
sad.
Karen, the
Yeah.
reason the Chinese government is so concerned about keeping their citizens happy is because in the last several years there's been numerous wildcat strikes. Many of them turned very violent because of the horrible working conditions and
Oh,
low
yes,
pay.
yes. But what I'm saying is that, yes, and they do have a lot of strikes there. They do become pretty violent, and that's why the government wants to keep dissent down. They have a huge population, and they know what happens when they don't keep their people happy. But also on that, I think it needs to be noted that not only keeping their people happy, they want to raise the standard of living for their people, which they have for a large segment, not all. They still have a lot of poverty, so that they can be independent of us as a market in the future. That's something that I think is of concern to government officials, is that, yes, we're a major market for Chinese goods, and a lot of U.S. companies have moved out of China. They've moved to Vietnam, they've moved to Bangladesh, they moved to Cambodia, other nations.
As the
But-
cost of labor goes up.
Exactly, exactly. But at the same time, China at some point will no longer be dependent upon the U.S. market. They will have their own, they want to raise their own people's standard. to
Let me
purchase.
pick up that point. David mentioned the chickens coming home to roost. I will mention the possibility of the drones coming home to roost. Here's another story from Russian television. All countries will have drone kill technology in 10 years, according to a report that they give us here. In just one decade, just about every country in the world will have the means to either build or buy unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, capable of launching missiles at enemy targets, thus dramatically changing the face of warfare. Despite a track record that is stained with the blood of innocent victims, drone technology is quickly becoming the weapon of choice for militaries around the globe. And it's too late for the United States, presently the leader in UAV technology, to stop the rush, according to Defense One, a site devoted to security issues. Just a few countries now hold membership in the elite drone club, including the US, the UK, Russia, Israel, Iran, Pakistan, and China. Other countries, such as South Africa and India, are actively seeking to join. According to the RAND organization, however, another 23 countries are developing or have developed armed drones. Experts point to China's prowess in building knockoff drones, which are expected to flood the market very soon. So every country
Yep.
can have its weaponized drone.
Right.
And the USA has been the leader in using this technology. So we will quickly have a whole bunch of followers. And of course, we will have elaborated an ideology, a rationale for using these drones, which other countries then will
We'll also use.
quickly
Yeah.
echo and emulate. And so they will start saying, hey, us too. And
Exactly.
There's-
again, what will we do at that stage?
Yeah.
It doesn't look good.
There's one thing
Comments?
there's one thing I kind of don't like about that article. I think that article is very true. They talk about the governments of other countries developing the drones. What it is actually the companies want to make a profit. The companies that make the drones want to make a profit, and they'll sell to anybody.
Yeah, the other
Oh,
countries
yes.
don't have to develop them. They can buy them.
Exactly.
Right,
And
right. And then develop their own, which is what
Sure.
China tends to do.
Yeah, and there was put on exhibit last week in Iran a copy of the drone that they took down, and what was it called?
we give drones away too to our
Yeah,
friends.
the one
by
that
way.
crashed. Oh, well, they found a way to bring it down. They constructed a duplicate, and they claim to have found all of the mechanisms, electronics, and so on that make it work. And so they are exhibiting this to the press and saying, "Hey, we've arrived also."
And that'll be the next boom, to figure, the how to figure out how to bring a drone down, or, so you build them and you use them, and now you're going to turn around and figure out how to destroy them.
Yeah. yeah.
Build smaller ones.
Another respect in which the USA has been a world leader is the use of torture. There's another report. The war on terrorism led to a worldwide increase of torture, according to Al Jazeera American News. Western nations are among those scrutinized in Amnesty International's report on global torture, set to be released on Tuesday. That's today, May 13th, 2014. The Human Rights Group's report comes on the heels of a vote by the Senate Intelligence Committee to declassify a 480-page report summarizing the CIA's interrogation programs, which were chronicled in a 5-year internal investigation into the treatment of detainees. The Senate report has sparked a feud between the CIA and the Senate Intelligence Committee that has led to a judicial review of whether some of the documents the Senate obtained were not cleared for release. Larry Seams, author of the torture report, and Manfred Nowak, the former UN Special Rapporteur on torture, sat down with Al Jazeera's America's David Schuster to discuss how America's use of torture during the war on terrorism has helped make torture a socially accepted practice worldwide. Their conversation was part of the channel's regular Sunday night segment, The Week Ahead. The United States has long been against torture, Seams said, but unfortunately, because of the U.S. own post-9/11 rendition, detention, and interrogation program, we ourselves have come under scrutiny. We have lost a lot of influence or ability to influence the conduct of other governments. So for a long time, we tried to think or to convince people that we had the moral high ground. We were constantly talking about freedom, democracy, and human rights, but when they find out what we're actually doing while we were talking about all that, other groups are saying, also, we can fight terrorism also. Any opposition to the government, our government, is terrorism, and we can use drones and torture to put them down, just as the USA, the mighty and powerful leader of the free world, has been doing. And who would object to that except a few deviants like us?
Like us, right?
Right. Okay, going on.
Free radicals.
Karen.
Okay, I just want to mention, in respect to what I was talking about regarding the girls, bring back the girls in Nigeria last week, there is now enough information out there that does show that, yes, the U.S. is very involved. And I was reading this book the other day. It's called The Changing Face of Empire, Special Ops, Drones, Spies, Proxy Fighters, Secret Bases, and Cyber Warfare by Nick Turse. And on page 6, I will just read you the last sentence here where he's discussing our operations in Africa, AFRICOM, having 14 major joint training exercises planned for 2012, including operations in Morocco, Cameroon, Gabon, Botswana, South Africa, Lesotho, Senegal, and what may become the Pakistan of Africa, Nigeria. And then again, we go to page 60 under Continental Drift. And I won't read you the whole thing here either, but this paragraph he refers to, the U.S. is now involved directly and by proxy in military and surveillance operations against an expanding list of regional enemies. They include Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb in North Africa, the Islamic movement Boko Haram in Nigeria, and again, more and more and more I won't go into, but I want to point out that this book was published in 2012. So I think this is proof right here that we have already been in Nigeria with our military. We know Shell oil is there. We know that it's probably the richest oil nation in that whole region. But this idea that they need U.S. troops to come over, and we've added a lot more military equipment, intelligence equipment, whatever. But if you watch the corporate media, you would get the impression that we weren't there So now we have to go in and help save the girls. Another excuse, we are already there. We have been there. We have been fighting the Boko Haram now for some time.
And there's no coincidence that Nigeria has lots of oil.
Right.
Where what happened in the 90s with the massacres in Rwanda and Burundi, who had no oil or real, natural resources of any, great extent. And our government just sat back and, as well as most of the European governments, just sat back and let the massacres, the genocide happen. So
Right.
there's your bottom line. Do you think these people that are in control of our government care about humanity or human rights? Are you kidding me? All they care about is making the wealthy richer through cheap labor and cheap or free natural resources. So that doesn't surprise me in the least, Karen.
Yeah. In the news today, American military surveillance aircraft are being used to look for the girls, apparently. But I think we know what that will probably lead to.
A smoke screen.
Once the camel gets his nose under the tent, the rest of them will follow. I'm not sure that
Good
What
saying.
way to put it?
that the Nigerians are aware of this, but the coming essential takeover of the country, they should know this by now in view of what's happened in other countries, but do they? Other questions, comments?
What book was that again, Karen?
Okay, when we're trading books, but this one's very
The
quick.
Changing
The
Face of
Changing
Empire?
Face of Empire by Nick Turse.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. It's very brief.
TURSE.
It's full of a lot of technicalities about military weapons and installations, etc. Ron, you might like this. So but the information's there. The information's there.
Okay, as we become more and more weaponized and using drones, back to that for a moment. Last week, a drone, unmanned aerial vehicle, that should be called more correctly, crashed into the 30th floor of a building in St. Louis. And the question of the day is, whose was it? Where did,
It's probably ours.
yeah, who's responsible for this? And that's going to become an ever more vexing, prominent
Local
question,
police have
I
it.
think, in the future. There are already reports of near misses, or near hits, rather, of commercial airliners, the number of drones that are being flown around. There are non-military drones available. A number of them are available on the domestic market, and we'll be seeing more and more of that. There's a rush now to try to lay out some rules by the Aviation Administration about what these drones can do, but they've already proliferated to the point where some are saying that they've become a menace to civil aviation, and a lot of things are being done, such as monitoring traffic and so on by observation drones that people don't know about. You've probably seen on the news some movies of things that were taken by these drones that are being used now more and more by police departments in this country and corporations and other users. So that's the future that's before us.
For all you gun owners out there, maybe it's time for an open season on drones.
Well, from what I understand, these drones, of course, are used for supposedly surveillance. And I do know that the sheriff here of Urbana, I believe, has one. But the thing that we have to look at is that, from what I've read, they are not that difficult to arm.
No.
And who's using them for surveillance? That's another question. I mean,
Well, the police
is it
departments,
maybe,
supposedly.
and how much maybe corporations have got into it. I mean, let's.
Who knows?
I mean, you can
Blackwater
buy them
down.
on eBay.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
And we know somebody who must have been looking for
I
one.
was.
Yeah,
I was
okay.
like,
Oh, there
how
you go.
easy is it to buy
Pricing them.
these things? And
And
yeah.
they're on eBay?
Yeah, you can get them on
Unbelievable.
eBay.
Unbelievable.
They're not armed, but I mean,
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the whole, when the drones first went over to our wars in the Middle East, they were not armed, and the army themselves armed them.
Okay.
So they were not originally designed
Right.
to be armed,
Okay.
and then later on were developed to be armed.
Oh,
But
okay.
so yeah, if people on the ground can
So now
arm them,
killing
then-
is a video game.
Yes.
Okay, you're watching Aware on the Air, a weekly report by members and friends of the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Urbana-Champaign, Illinois. Let's move on to David Johnson.
Okay, today I just want to talk some more about the economic effects of our ongoing wars. You know, it's interesting because we keep having to ask ourselves not just what's the effect on us, you know, the average working people, both in terms of not just our loved ones that might go in the military and possibly come back dead or dismembered or psychologically traumatized, but also what it costs us as a society about what we don't, what we're giving up in order to make a very small percentage of the population very, very wealthy. I think it needs to just go beyond that too and ask how is it that we as citizens have lost control of our government? And you know, it's interesting because I just picked up actually it's a year-old issue of Rolling Stones. It's about it's by Matt Taibbi, called "Too Big to Jail," and it's about how this one bank, it's a British-owned bank, but has lots of operations here in the United States, HSBC. Was involved in laundering drug money, as well as money for a lot of terrorist organizations. But yet, it's like the bank still has its charter. Not only does it still have its charter, nobody went to jail from these actions. And what's interesting, it wasn't just like they just did it one time. They were caught doing it back in 2003 and warned repeatedly to stop it, and they kept doing it and kept doing it and kept doing it. And most recently, they ended up getting a $1.9 billion fine. Sounds like a lot of money, but it came out to be about, let's see here, it turned out to be 5 weeks profit. So talk about a slap on the wrist. And I think this is relevant to see just how it is that the corporate sector, and particularly a lot of large banks, have become basically beyond the law. And not just beyond the law, but basically are controlling the laws and controlling our society. And I think, you know, this is a really important thing that people need to be more aware of, and that we need to start demanding this change. I mean, because you have to think about it. Do we really live in a democracy when the people no longer have control of our government, but instead is controlled by corporate money and influence? And so I guess that's kind of just my mini theme for today. I do recommend this article, though, Too Big to Jail, in Rolling Stone's, it's a 2013, February 28th, 2013 issue. You know, it's really enlightening. What's interesting is how the next article in the same magazine is about the brilliant life and tragic death of Aaron Schwartz. Great comparison about how they treated these banks that were involved in, well, basically, you know, helping various organizations that, you know, commit murder, like drug cartels and Russian mafia and, you know, terrorist organizations, how they're let off with a slap on the wrist, and yet they go after this guy, Aaron Schwartz, to the point to where he committed suicide because he was looking at 35 years in prison for basically making available to the public information that was he was able to obtain at universities, but because he infringed on corporate patent and copyright, that really being at a university, it would be, you'd think it would be open source material, but he thought it should be made open to the public, and the federal government went after him like he was the world's most dangerous criminal. So I mean, I just think it's a real interesting point to think about and to discuss.
Can I comment on Aaron Schwartz? The one thing I recall over that was Chris Hayes, who has a regular program on MSNBC now, I think, was good friends with Aaron Schwartz. He knew him. And he was so outraged at the time because he said the information, and he said this on TV, he said the information was not classified, confidential.
Correct.
Oh, no,
It was
no.
public information, without a doubt. So there was absolutely no reason for them to hound him the way they did.
Well, I think it's more and more proof that, you know, regular people are now targeted for bringing to surface information that's against what these people that are running the show think. It's just over and over and over. And you think it kind of parallels the whole drone thing. Like, okay, I guess we have to have more surveillance to make sure that the masses are staying in line and not rebelling against what's happening in this country. So, it's a sin what happened to that young man, because he was brilliant. And
Definitely no criminal.
Right.
He was acting in the public good, actually.
yes.
Something Ron and I were talking about very briefly the other day. We mentioned the book Brave New World. And I said I read it when I was very young. I don't remember the details. But I do recall it did have an impact on me. And I actually liked it better than 1984. Everyone seems to know 1984, which we're living and have been since 1984 at least, if not sooner before that. Actually, I thought that in the 70s. But Ron, why don't you comment on Brave New World, what it prophesied, and that was written in the 30s. It was written in the 30s by
Well,
Aldous
1932,
Huxley.
Aldous Huxley wrote this novel, Brave New World. The title comes from speech by Miranda in Shakespeare's The Tempest. But anyway, the gimmick there is that how do you control large numbers of people? There's a lot of information about the new biological discoveries of the day and how that was being used to generate different classes of people. There were the alphas and the betas and the gammas and so on. But you have to, of course, read it yourself to get the full effect of that. But it's how a society was completely controlled. And it was done primarily with pleasure instead of pain, which was, I think, very prophetic. George Orwell in 1984 had this notion that it would be by punishment and pain that the society would be controlled if people got out of line. But
Pleasure and
Huxley
pain.
in 1932 already had this insight that that's the wrong way to go about it. So you keep people supplied with lots of drugs, Soma, which had official approval. When anyone started getting upset, you about the way things are going or start looking rebellious, you give them another supply of Soma, and that will quiet them down. You can think of your own equivalents today.
Well,
and then, of course,
entertainment,
yeah,
Fahrenheit
and then of course,
451 then, yeah.
plenty of sexual activity, complete freedom in that respect. And if you can use these two means of pacification of the society, you can create a perfectly controlled hierarchical society. And it's obviously something to think about. Are we coming to that? I wonder sometimes.
60s.
Yeah, I mean, look at
the
the
60s. I'm sorry, what a lot of the 60s. Well, the thing is, you control people through entertainment, pleasure,
Right,
etc. But then, for those that go outside of the box, so to speak, the Aaron Schwartzes, the Jeremy Scahill, well, he hasn't had it yet, but Bradley Manning, Snowden. I mean, that's when you come in with the torture and the pain and the 1984 punishments.
Let's go on. Deb, do you have something for us today?
Yes. Well, I thought I had my report, and then I saw this this morning. Yesterday, there was a fundraiser, and I'll just hold this up, with Mr. Clinton and Mr. Bush, and it was held at the Metro Toronto Convention Center in Canada. And basically, I read this this morning from the Center of Constitutional Rights. George Bush is in Toronto today for a fundraiser. By allowing Bush to enter its territory, Canada is undermining the UN Convention Against Torture, which was accepted to ensure there are no safe havens for torture. Canada is already under review by a UN committee for failing to take action when Bush visited in 2011. During that visit, 4 men brought forward claims of torture against Bush for the treatment they endured while detained at Guantanamo and in Afghanistan. Canadian law criminalizes torture whenever it occurs, and Canada's obligations under the Convention Against Torture make it clear that if a known torturer sets foot in the country, the government must investigate and prosecute if appropriate. Evidence of Bush's role in authorizing torture in Abu Ghraib, Bagram, Guantanamo, and CIA black sites has been in the public record for years, and Bush himself has admitted to his involvement. Canada is flouting the law by turning a blind eye to Bush's visit. The Center for Constitutional Rights and the Canadian Center for International Justice submitted the following letter to the UN Committee Against Torture regarding Bush's visit and requesting it to take action. And I actually downloaded the petition, which I have here, and I'm just going to read a small portion of it. In light of the factual record previously presented to Canada, setting forth Bush's role in ordering, directing, authorizing, approving, facilitating, and failing to prevent or punish acts of torture against persons detained by the United States between 2001 and 2009, including the complainants, and recalling the pending communication, Canada must take steps to ensure custody over, investigate, and prosecute Bush, lest it again breach its obligations under the convention. So I'm not sure if Mr. Bush made it back to the States or not, but I
sure
kind of
he did.
have my fingers crossed that maybe he didn't quite make it.
Canada did the right thing and arrested him. No.
Well, that would be nice.
And so on Saturday, Mr. Ron over here found this little treasure of a book called Pieces of Intelligence, and it's basically filled with little statements that Mr. Rumsfeld made while he was Secretary of Defense under the Bush regime. And I just want to read one of them because this book kept me up, and I just couldn't believe what I was reading.
It kept you up laughing.
Yeah, and in total shock, really. But on February 12th in 2002, this is what he said, and the author, compiled and edited by Hart Seeley. He sort of broke down these little treasures of what Mr. Rumsfeld would say and put it in poetry form. I know, it's great, right? The unknown. As we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. There is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
Was that an answer to a specific question by a journalist or something?
No. It was actually a memo, and he brings it up a lot. Rumsfeld
Yes,
actually
February
brings it up.
12th, 2002,
Yeah.
Department of Defense news briefing. This
Yeah.
is what he said. And there's another one, just three little lines. I cannot stop without saying this one. Needless to say, the president is correct. Whatever it was he said. and that also was a Department of Defense briefing. So,
God.
I mean, and I'm going to continue this stuff with Mr. Rumsfeld because it's so fascinating. We don't have time today, but I'm going to ask to keep this little treasure for another week. And but honestly, this book right here, and I see that you have the same one. The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein has some wonderful things in here about the invasion of Iraq. And so I sort of dug through it and found some information about Donald Rumsfeld, and I'll get into that more next week.
Wonderful.
Shock
Yeah, how many of
doctrine.
you saw the movie, The Unknown Known? Which
I
was-
did.
Karen did.
Yeah, which was in
Yeah.
town recently. And
I would like Karen
it
to
was amazing.
comment on that.
Yeah, please do.
It's worth watching and being scared. I think I mentioned last week that maybe I didn't, that I think it's amazing what the director of that documentary did. Instead of having Rumsfeld talk and then someone else say, bring in context or other things, he basically just had Rumsfeld talk. And
Errol Morris.
yeah, he's amazing. He's really, really good. And so basically what Rumsfeld ended up doing was contradicting himself with every other statement, basically. And Rumsfeld would say, we don't go into other countries and assassinate leaders. And then he's like, oh, we were going into Iraq and we knew that we could attack this one farm and take care of it all and we wouldn't have to go to war. You know, we were basically trying to assassinate the leader. And so it's back and forth of just Rumsfeld tying a noose around his own neck, basically. And it's really, really quite interesting. And Rumsfeld is, you know, the short quips or the weird, he's a scary guy. And actually, a friend of mine had been up in Chicago when they did Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, that NPR radio, and they interviewed the director on that, and she said that was just a really interesting because they were interviewing him about this documentary that he had
Well,
made.
actually, he is an Academy Award winner for a movie, The Fog of War, that came out. The year's not on here.
Yeah, it's about McNamara.
Yeah.
We discussed that last week.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah. Well, thank God he's out of power now, right?
Yeah, but he should be in jail.
Yeah,
Right?
he should
Cheney,
be.
Well,
Bush,
hey,
Rice,
I have a comment on that, along with Kissinger.
and Kissinger.
And Kissinger.
By the
but
way,
here-
Henry
here's
Kissinger
a
cannot
pro.
go to Europe or most countries in Latin America.
because
Really?
he will be
Yeah.
arrested.
That's great.
He's a war criminal,
Good.
and there's an outstanding warrant for his arrest.
Well, I have a comment here that will throw you. Stephen Cohen was interviewed by Amy Goodman recently. Stephen is a very outspoken critic of our policy, U.S. interference in the Ukraine, okay? But one thing he did say, and this is in relation to Fareed Zakaria's on CNN Sunday, I think it was at noon, interview with Henry Kissinger. Now, I saw him bring Henry Kissinger in, and I started to moan and groan because every time I see Kissinger, I get so angry, okay?
I hear you.
And I honestly didn't pay attention to the interview. I think I turned it off because I can't stand Kissinger. Okay. Stephen Cohen, however, the next morning pointed out that Kissinger understands the European situation very well. And he does understand the dangers that are taking place right now. And he's concerned because Obama won't talk with him. So here we have Stephen Cohen, who I'm sure would agree with me that Kissinger is a war criminal. However, he said, why won't President Obama, speak to Kissinger, a former foreign secretary? Because at least on this issue, Kissinger is very worried because what's happening in the Ukraine is so dangerous that it is being referred to by many who really know what's happening there as dangerous as the Cuban Missile Crisis. So okay, so I should have listened to the interview with Kissinger, but I missed out.
What Cohen has been saying on the nightly news report on PBS, for example, is very important. And he's pointing out that Russia and Putin take this very seriously. They will not allow foreign hostile powers on their border. But NATO tried to do that anyway. And this is an existential question for Russia, according to Cohen. They lost, various estimates, 20 to 26 million people in World War II, and yet very little is said about that here. We'll only keep hearing about the 6 million. But, there's this other 26 million, perhaps, who were killed in Russia. And there are a lot of people who still have a long memory of that.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, I just want to mention this. I found this letter to the American people on Ukraine by Alexander Dugin. I found this on the Greenville Post, and I really suggest that everyone read it. It's really heartfelt. Basically, he explains how he doesn't blame the American people at all. He blames the political elite in this country for what's happening in the Ukraine. And he sort of gives a brief history of Russia and which is very interesting, and events and meanings and short prognosis and then a conclusion. But I have to say, it was very moving to know that you know, it's not the American people that are hated by the Russian people, it's our government.
Oh, of course, that's true worldwide.
Right.
Any place I've ever been in throughout the world, seriously, they generally they like American people when they work with them, when they deal with them, whether they're employees of companies, American companies, or just, you know, they come to school here, they go back to their home country. But once they see what's happening, what our government is doing, they're just appalled. So on that, I still say we have to take responsibility for the things that our government does.
Yes, it's a democracy after
It
all.
is a democracy after all, and we have to take responsibility because we will be held accountable. So,
Well, the research that's been done is more and more calling that into question.
Well, sure,
We've been
whether
called a
a democracy,
plutocracy
yeah.
many times now
Yeah.
because of the influence
Yeah,
of the
that's- yeah.
very rich. But there's been some empirical research on this, trying to figure out what the rationale would be and the policy questions that would be decided one way or another if we were a democracy or if we were a oligarchy. And the evidence comes down on the side of oligarchy.
No, you're right,
We are
John.
that without knowing it
Yeah.
in such a large degree. It's never that clear cut with these empirical matters, but the evidence is there
Yeah.
that we should stop calling ourselves
A democracy, right,
democracy,
right.
admit that we are oligarchy, which is dominated and controlled by a plutocratic bunch of oligarchs. But that's a hard thing for the American people to swallow.
for
And-
others, and
Yes.
that's a problem. Around the world, they think of the U.S. as being a democracy.
Or we call ourselves.
Because we call ourselves one. You're absolutely correct, and I shouldn't have called us a democracy because
I was
you're absolutely
being
correct.
ironic, yeah.
Right, but
Sarcastic.
the rest of the world, the average person out there, does see us as a democracy. So they will hold us responsible.
And wasn't it Franklin that said, Benjamin Franklin, who said, you have a democracy and now it's your responsibility to keep it. So
Yeah.
I'm going
Ah,
to change
good.
the subject to Pete Seeger, who died this year in 2014 in January at the age of 94. Urbana, Illinois has been celebrating his birthday this month, the first half of the month. His birthday was actually May 3rd, but we've been doing several things over the several weeks. And Pete Seeger once said, a good song reminds us what we're fighting for. So that's why it's titled. The Urbana Free Library will be publicly showing the PBS American Masters film Pete Seeger, The Power of Song, this Wednesday, tomorrow, at 6:30 at the Urbana Free Library. Filmmaker Jim Brown has access to remarkable archival footage, old TV shows, home movies, and a family photo album weaving together the story of the Seegers with testimony by admirers who represented his influence and legacy. There's a testimonies include those by Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez. It goes on and on and on. Urbana's singer-songwriter Paul Kotheimer will also do a live performance that will include several songs made famous by Seeger. Paul is known for his wit and passion, his versatility and tenacity, and he does some great songs here, anti-war songs included. Pete Seeger was an American folk singer and activist, and a fixture on nationwide radio in the 1940s. He also had a string of hit recordings during the 1950s as a member of the Weavers, most notably the recording of Leadbelly's Goodnight Irene. Members of the Weavers were blacklisted during the McCarthy era. In the 1960s, Seeger reemerged on the public scene as a prominent singer of protest music in support of international disarmament, civil rights, counterculture, and environmental causes. He was a prolific songwriter. His best-known songs include things like Where Have All the Flowers Gone?, If I Had a Hammer. He wrote them with other people too, and Turn, Turn, Turn. He has given credit for reviving the old spiritual We Will Overcome, making it more singable with We Shall Overcome, which became the acknowledged anthem of the 1960s American Civil Rights Movement. His song, a song that he sang, Waist Deep in the Big Muddy, was also highly criticized as he was coming out of the blacklist. And they wouldn't, on the Smothers Brothers, and they wouldn't film it, they wouldn't show it the first time, but then they eventually did show it a couple months later. I'm just going to read some of the lyrics from Guantanamera, a song he did not write, but a song that he sang. It's actually a Cuban song.
We have to wind down here quickly.
Yeah.
Sharon.
I am a truthful man from this land of palm trees. Before dying, I want to share these poems of my soul. My verses are light green, but they are also flaming red. I cultivate a white rose in June and in January for the sincere friend who gives me his hand. And for the cruel one who would tear out this heart with which I live, I cultivate neither thistles nor nettles. I cultivate a white rose.
Very good. Thank you, Karen. Final notes before we go. In the news today, some ex- or Blackwater mercenaries have been found to be fighting in Ukraine. Various reports, 100 to 400 of them. Do you have anything on that quickly?
I do, right there.
Oh, okay. Well, we can't go into it, but this is the next ominous thing is the use of these mercenaries by the Kiev government, apparently, to fight the pro-Russian groups in Ukraine. So I think we'll be hearing more about that.
Privatization.
Yeah. And final note.
Can I rush in one quick thing
Sure,
here
sure.
on privatization? Anybody who loves cats, make sure you let your representative know to vote against number SB 648, which is coming up, and it's going to mean the killing of lots of cats, but I won't go into detail now. But that is in Illinois for all Illinois residents who are cat lovers. 648.
Okay. Final notes then. Headline, Israeli spying on U.S. at alarming level, according to Agence France Press. And you'll have to follow up on that on your own. Finally, the costs of war. I have a note here somewhere about $73.13 are being paid every month now by the Department of Veterans Affairs to the daughter of a Civil War soldier. This has gone on for about 150 years now. The Civil War concluded in 1865, but we're still paying for it. So think about that. Will we still be paying for the survivors of our current wars 150 years from now? I think it deserves
Will we
some serious
survive?
thought.
Will we survive 150 years from now?
Very, very pressing question. Okay, so well, with that, I think we have to sign off. This is Ron Zog for Aware on the Air, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Urbana-Champaign. Any parting words from anyone?
Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Big show
thanks.
next week. Big
Yeah,
show next
yeah.
week.
Yeah, we're hoping to have something a little more interesting to some people.
Entertainment.
Some entertainment.
Musical entertainment next
week. If
So that
things
you
work
don't have
out
to
right.
think.
But
Right.
that's the end then. Until next week, I hope you'll tune in again, and we'll have more to say about the
That's for sure.
situation of war and racism locally. Good night.
Peace out.